Welcome to the Truth and Liberty Show, where trusted leaders bring biblical insights to important issues to help you stand for truth and effect godly change in our nation and in our world.
Welcome to the Truth and Liberty Show. So glad you could be joining us today. On today's program, we're going to be looking at an issue that has burdened our nation almost from the very beginning. And that's the issue of race and racism. My guest today is Dr. Eric Wallace, the author of a book entitled The Heart of Apostasy: How the Black Church Abandoned Biblical Authority for Political Ideology. He's the first African American to earn a PhD in biblical studies from Union Presbyterian Seminary and is an outspoken critic of CRT. You know, the first British colony in what is now America was at Jamestown, Virginia, founded in 1607. At that time in human history, of course, slavery itself has been around since the beginning of human history. All empires throughout the ages have always held slaves. It was extremely common for one empire, if it conquered another, to make slaves or tributaries out of the people that they had just conquered. Slavery as an institution goes all the way back to the beginning. But the enslavement of Black Africans as such, as an institution, began, it was actually started by the Muslims, okay? So the Muslims invaded North Africa, beginning in probably the 8th century, perhaps 9th century, as their empire, their religion spread by conquest. They went throughout North Africa and then up into Europe and across, of course, the Middle East and into Asia. And in Africa, they began to capture Black Africans and to sell them, first off, keep them as their own slaves, but then sell them into slavery, first to other Africans, next to, and not necessarily in this order, to Europeans, and then to Arab people all throughout the Middle East. And so this Muslim slave trade began to infect Europe. In America, slavery as an institution backed by the law did not exist for the first 50 years after Jamestown. Now, many people immigrated to America in those early days as what are called indentured servants. They would contract to work for someone who was immigrating for a term of 7 to 8 years after they arrived in order to pay off their debt for the journey and perhaps other obligations. The first slave owner in America, it wasn't called the United States of America yet, it was just the British colonies, but the first slave owner in the British colonies in what is now America was actually a Black man. His name was Anthony Johnson. He was an indentured servant who came to the colonies as an indentured servant, not a slave, but an indentured servant. Once he paid off his debt, he was a free Black man and became very wealthy landowner and tobacco farmer. He actually acquired his own indentured servant, also a Black man, and went to court to get his indentured servitude declared as a lifelong service, in other words, slavery. So the first slave owner in America was actually a Black man. Do I say this to impugn Black people? Absolutely not. What's the point then from this? The point is that the first point is, slavery was not invented in America. It's an age-old practice. Second, enslavement of Black Americans did not begin in America. In fact, it didn't even begin for 50 years as a legally backed institution. And third, that slavery is motivated by economics. It's motivated by greed and power. It's not primarily motivated by race or racism, right? So tobacco and later cotton became the chief source of income in the colonies, or in the southern colonies, and slaves were recognized as the most profitable way to farm the land and harvest this cash crop. Now, this was a pre-existent slave trade, the Black slave trade out of Africa, before America, right? It was established by Muslims, as I said, and so forth. Now, it's a detestable practice. There's no question about it. It is an ungodly, an inhumane, and an unbiblical thing to do, for sure. And it's important for us to know these facts, not to approve them, but because we need to understand the origins and roots of racism in this nation. So racism was added intellectually, mentally, philosophically, on top of the economic motivation for slavery to justify it. Because we were a Christian nation, and our consciences were telling us, us, the people at the time, I'm sure, this isn't right. So to justify it, we impose this cloak of racism on it. The racism is real, but it's not the origin, it's not the foundation of slavery. So you hear things like, to resist against those who are calling for the abolition of slavery, you hear ideas coming forward that, well, blacks are inferior, they need us. Oh, this is actually better for them because they couldn't make it on their own. They're not fully human, or they would say, oh, they're cursed by God. See this Bible verse here? And these ungodly lies from the devil were evoked and commonly believed in the South in order to soothe, placate, and sear the conscience of the American slave-owning population. But the institution of slavery became entrenched, especially in the South. And during colonial times, one thing, though, that people don't know is many of the northern colonies actually attempted to outlaw the practice of slavery, or the importation of slaves at least. And because slavery was already an institution in England, these laws were vetoed by the King of England. The British were economically dependent upon the profits they were reaping from slavery in the West Indies, especially, where they were making a great deal of money on sugar farming and other kinds of fruit and tobacco and this kind of thing in the Indies. And so the king, this going straight into the royal coffers, did not want to outlaw slavery, and he overruled the laws passed by the colonial legislatures in America along those lines. So in the middle of the 18th century, so the 1700s, there's a small little event on the history of the world, a little blip on the radar called the First Great Awakening, a massive revival that sweeps over the American colonies and over England. There's a preacher in that time called George Whitefield, another one Jonathan Edwards, and revival was sweeping the nation. Incredible that Whitefield preached 18,000 sermons, and 80% of Americans heard him in person. But I mentioned the Great Awakening because the conscience of America began to rise, and principles, biblical ideals from the Bible began to emerge about what is government, what is man, what about the rights of man, what about freedom, and these sorts of things. These things were being preached in American pulpits and gave rise to the American Revolution, right? And at the time of the American Revolution, slavery was a significant moral issue in the mind of most Americans. Thomas Jefferson, even though he was from Virginia and even though he owned slaves, included in the first draft of the Declaration of Independence a grievance. Now, the Declaration has a list of 20-something grievances against the King of England, where we American colonists were saying, here's what you've done to violate our rights, and you won't stop, even though we've objected and petitioned many times. So the Declaration is giving the reasons for our independence. The largest, in terms of words, the largest grievance listed was that the king would not allow us to abolish the slave trade. Think of that. Now, that grievance did not survive. It was removed from the final draft. And the reason is because two southern colonies, Georgia and South Carolina, objected to it. And they said, if you leave that in there, we're not signing. We're not going to sign because we like slavery and we don't want to get rid of it. Okay? And we depend upon it. Well, many people say, oh, the Founding Fathers were hypocrites and bigots and slaveholders. Most of them were not slaveholders. And in matter of principle, many were opposed to slavery and even tried to free their slaves or outlaw slavery. But we say in modern times, oh, they should have taken a stand against slavery then and there. But the truth is that without all of the colonies on board, it had to be unanimous. If you look at the Declaration, it says the unanimous declaration of the United Colonies. And it had to be unanimous Because if the colonists were not united in their quest for independence, in their willingness to resist the British Empire for the cause of freedom, then there's no way the revolution would have succeeded. And if independence had failed, what would have happened to the dream of liberty? What would have happened to freedom and equality for all and the ideal of self-government? I believe they would have failed and gone to the grave right along with independence. Tyranny and the power of the king would have been vindicated and proven right, and all these upstarts would have been embarrassed and humiliated and punished and put to death. And no one, who knows how long it would be until freedom had another chance to enter the world stage in such a powerful way. Our founders understood this. They had a once-in-a-millennium opportunity, and they recognized they could not do it unless they were all unified, and they could not unify if they left slavery in the Declaration of Independence. It had to wait for another day. The Constitution, which came, a few years later, 12, 13 years later, actually, the Founding Fathers set a date in the Constitution by which Congress could ban the slave trade. It's specifically in there, and it was 1808. And the first day of that year, Thomas Jefferson signed a law banning the importation of slaves to America. He was president at that time. Now, it took another 57 years and a bloody civil war before slavery itself, the enslavement of blacks, was banned in America with the passage of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. After the Civil War in America, blacks were given the right to vote, could own property, and were full legal members of society. And in the South, Union troops were present to enforce what was called Reconstruction. Blacks were elected to Congress and other positions throughout government, began to own farms and property and all these sorts of things. Equality was enforced during Reconstruction in the South, but after about 15 years, the North controlling the South, the nation was exhausted. And eventually Reconstruction had to end. And the Northern forces and everything withdrew, and the Southern states were fully reintegrated into the Union. And the Southern states began to pass race-based discrimination laws called Jim Crow laws. They imposed race-based conditions on voting. They imposed segregation laws. They banned blacks from going to college. They banned blacks from owning property, and many, many other things, serving on juries and this sort of things. And it wasn't just law. Racism remained, slavery did not. But the hatred and anger in the hearts of Southern people caused them to want to reimpose this institution in a way. And even law enforcement, was racist with lynchings and this kind of thing. Of course, the party of secession in the South, the party that dominated the South was the Democrat Party. Jefferson Davis and all the Confederate states were Democrat states before and after the Civil War. And after the Civil War, the Ku Klux Klan and the Democratic Party were essentially the same thing. This racism and inequality even spread to some northern states, and all northern states, but to varying degrees, and became the norm in America, not Jim Crow level norm, but racism in America was very common for the next 100 years, until the Civil Rights Movement in the 1950s and 1960s. And in the 1960s, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed. Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement and marches in Washington and Selma and all of this, and the Voting Rights Act of 1968 and other laws, housing reform and other stuff, legally banned discrimination in America. And we are at a place today that where discrimination based on race is illegal in public accommodations, housing, education, finance, law enforcement, voting, just about everywhere. And incredible progress has been made in terms of eliminating racism from this country. Of course, it's so important that we say this. You can't eliminate racism because racism is prejudice against other people based on differences or perceived differences. And that's sin, isn't it, right? But you can't eliminate sin by the law. You can only pass laws against it and try to enforce those laws. But what people think and do in their private lives or in their hearts and minds, there's only so much we can do. So yes, racism still persists and it will always persist. But the country we have today, America today, in terms of racism, bears no resemblance to the country that existed 150 years ago. Now, the Republican Party was the party of Lincoln, and nearly all blacks after the Civil War knew that. Lincoln was called the Great Emancipator, and almost all blacks were Republicans. In the 1930s, with Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, he began to pass laws that were government handouts, government support, government aid, right? And it really appealed to the lower levels of economic society, including blacks. So black Americans began a shift toward the Democratic Party because Roosevelt was Democrat. And this shift went into overdrive in the 1960s with the passage of the Civil Rights Act. And the reason is because the president was a Democrat, and Kennedy, who was pro-civil rights, was a Democrat. Even though Republicans were instrumental in getting the legislation passed, they got tarred with the image of being anti-black, anti-civil rights, because people like Barry Goldwater and others were saying, wait, we don't have the power to do this. This is infringing on free enterprise and private property rights, and this is an overreach by the government. Well, that was viewed as racist, and so the table got turned in America, and there was a mass movement of blacks to the Democratic Party. Upwards of 90% of blacks became registered Democrats and began to vote as a bloc. Well, the other thing that LBJ did, Lyndon Johnson in the 1960s, is he campaigned on and got passed legislation called the War on Poverty. So aid to families with dependent children and other forms of welfare, Medicaid and things like this. When he passed these laws, it's stated that he remarked, we're going to own the N for the next 50 years. You can fill in the blanks. What I'm saying is LBJ knew the power of this government subsidy was going to increase the loyalty of black Americans to the Democratic Party indefinitely, and he proved to be correct. So after the passage of the civil rights laws, other demographics in our society began using the civil rights playbook, beginning with women. The women's lib movement, women's liberation in the 1970s, bra burning and all this kind of stuff, and equal pay, for equal work and all this kind of thing. Women can do everything men can do, and we can do it better. And then other racial minorities. By the 1990s, the gay movement was in full swing, and they wanted civil rights applied to them as well, even though their behavior is not intrinsic like skin color. Okay, but that's for another day. All of these movements were championed by the entire press and academia in America, and they were caught up in this new way of thinking that we are now struggling with in our country. And it's the idea that there's a powerful and privileged group that oppress the other groups. And this goes all the way back to Marxism and beyond. The ideology of Karl Marx was, there's the haves and the have-nots. The haves, we're going to call them the bourgeois. The have-nots, we're going to call them the proletariat. So we have those who own the property and those who are the workers. And the workers are oppressed by the ones who own the property, and he called that property capital. Okay? So the capitalists oppress the workers. And so pitting these two groups against each other in a grievance alleging oppression. Well, this playbook worked in Russia. It worked in other places. When he got to America, America was too equal and too prosperous. It didn't work very well. Eventually, the Marxists realized, well, we need to kind of adjust this a little bit. It's not just the haves and the have-nots. It's races, and it's sex, like male and female. And then it gets expanded to, well, not just regular sex, it's homosexuals, and then transgenders, and every group we can imagine, we lump over here in a minority class, and we attack this other group. Well, who's the other group? Well, it's the white, basically all that's left, the white Christian males, okay? And so here we are today, struggling in this massive, confusing, conflicting, strife-filled political arena. And the reason it's strife-filled is because of this class warfare. And so the question, when you look at what's going on, originally Martin Luther King said that he dreamed of a day when a man would be judged by the content of his character, not the color of his skin, a colorblind society. But the powers that be realized, wait a second, there's political power and money to be had by stoking the flames of grievance. And this is what's going on in America today. Every constituent group, and I mean every, in the Democratic Party has a grievance. They are built on envy. The lifeblood of the Democratic Party today in America is envy. If you take envy and grievance away, you have no party left. And so this is the battle in modern day America. And my guest today, Dr. Eric Wallace, is a visionary who and an author. And as I said, he earned a PhD. And he's also he's the founder of an organization that advocates for the principles of equality and freedom for Black Americans based on biblical values, not based on Marxism and group ideology. And I think you're going to really enjoy this very informative interview with Dr. Wallace. And so don't go away. We're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. You won't want to miss this. We'll see you in just a minute.
Darkness has attacked our nation, but God is raising a standard. Now is the time to wake up and shine the light across America and around the world. Believers are fighting back. Eyes are opening. Hearts are changing, and Christ is being proclaimed. In government, education, family, media, and the church, we are mobilizing to engage culture with truth. Go to truthandliberty.net.
All right, everybody, welcome back to Truth and Liberty. So glad to have you with us again, and really excited to be able to share with you an interview now with my special guest, Dr. Eric Wallace. Dr. Wallace, thank you for joining us today on Truth and Liberty.
It's my pleasure to be with you, Rich.
It's great to see you again, sir. We met at the National Religious Broadcasters Conference a few weeks ago and just had a great conversation there. And I just wanted to give our viewers an opportunity to kind of be exposed to you and your ministry and the contributions you're making to the whole question of race in America today from a Christian perspective. Let's just start off, Dr. Wallace, with your book. You have this book out with a really kind of provocative title, if you might say, right? The Heart of Apostasy. Has the Black Church traded truth for political ideology? Tell us about this book, sir.
Well, let me get the subtitle, because that's what's really what kind of takes this over the edge, if you will. It's how the Black Church has abandoned biblical authority for political ideology and how to regain it. So I don't leave it there. I tell there's a way in which to fix it.
Okay.
And so I wrote the book because I felt like the Black Church had been listening to too many, and you can say this about almost any church, Black, white, Hispanic. And let me also say that ultimately, obviously, there's only really one church. It's the Church of Jesus Christ. It's not divided into Black, white, Hispanic,
Amen.
Korean, whatever. I mean, there are some cultural differences that allow people to have different worship styles and things like that. Like there's a Korean church down the street from me. I don't go there because they speak Korean. So, so unless they're going to do an English service, I'm probably not going to be there. But it's not because they discriminate against me. It's because, we have freedom of choice. So, but I felt like the Black Church had been listening to too many people on the outside. And actually, I kind of talk about that in chapter 2, where, we're looking at, critical race theory. We're looking at Black Lives Matter. We're listening to the grievance, the politics of racial grievance. And these are not Christian. They're not based on Christian ideology or the biblical text. And as a biblical scholar, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, why are we listening to people who don't share our worldview? They don't have a biblical worldview. And so I begin to see a drift of the church, even Black evangelical church. Now, there's always kind of been a bifurcation of the church, even in the white church, right? You got your conservatives, and then you have your liberal progressives, even in quote Christianity. I would say some of these folks aren't really Christian, but they still claim to be Christian. And so we begin to see more of it within the Black church, and actually be able to see those who would claim an Orthodox Christianity moving away from that and actually prioritizing the amount of melanin in their skin versus what Jesus actually has to say. We've gotten into the identity politics, and it's hurt the body of Christ, and actually caused us to a certain extent almost to go to war with each other, because the left is saying that the right are a bunch of racists. Those who dare vote the Republican Party or vote conservative values are really not Christian. And it's a problem. So I wanted to address that, and I used the Gospel of Luke to talk about it. I felt like we were in the same position as the early church, waiting for the return of Christ, right? And I saw some similarities, and I said, you know what, I could take that that understanding of Luke and then use it to talk about how it's a lot like the church today, and then more specifically use the parable of the sower and to talk about the kinds of seed or kinds of heart that we find even today in today's church.
You know, slavery and the aftermath of slavery with Jim Crow laws in the South and racism, has it created sort of an entire population that has been traumatized, or at least historically, and as a result of that, grievance and offense have set in that have caused some blindness and some wrong prioritization among Black Christians in America?
I answer that question. So the grievance industry started back then. In fact, you got Booker T. Washington talking about it. And I'm pretty sure I mentioned it in my book, where he talks about how there's a section of people who want to talk about the wrongs and the troubles of Black people, not because they want to help solve them, but because they want to get paid. Wow. They're using it as a way, to earn a living. It's to get people riled up. And that happened back then, and it still happens today, because people see a way of which, of which they can earn a living by continuing to get people riled up. Because if you look at today, some of what's going on in the Black communities, especially the far left, they want to continue to talk about slavery. They want to continue to talk about Jim Crow. They want to talk about Emmett Till, how he was killed. They want to talk about some of the atrocities that happened long time ago to gin up the emotion, right? If you keep people emotional and then act as though, well, nothing has changed, look what happened to Trayvon Martin. Look what happened to, this person or that person. It's the same thing that happened, 200 years ago. And it's not true. I mean, we're much freer than we ever been. And there are some people who want to say that the trauma of slavery, and I don't want to downplay slavery. Slavery was a bad thing, but not all Black people were in slavery, and not all white people had slaves. Even in the South, you had to be somewhat wealthy to be able to have slaves, and so So the conservatives argue that slavery and Jim Crow do not account for some of the problems in the Black community today. And actually, we're working on a documentary called Black Families Matter, Reclaiming a Community in Crisis. Yep. Because we've seen that out of wedlock births are over 70%. So when Moynihan wrote his report, it was 24%, 24.5.
Okay, and so if I could just jump in, you're referring to former Senator Daniel Moynihan back in the, I don't know when he wrote that, in the 1980s or something.
1965.
Oh, 65, that long ago. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So in 1965, 1/4 of Black children were born outside of a home with a father. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay. And today the number is what, 70%?
It's over 70%.
Okay. And so all these Democrat policies, all of this stoking the flames of racism, by the political left have not cured the problem at all. They've made it far worse.
Yes, it's this dependency, the war on poverty, right?
Yeah.
The actual war on poverty should have been, get married, finish high school, get married. No, excuse me, I'm getting it wrong again. The success sequence is finish high school, get a job, get married, and then have children.
Yep.
And you're less likely to fall into poverty.
Yeah, far less.
Except
right? Yeah.
but the government decided they were going to give money to people who had babies out of wedlock. And so the thing that you subsidize, you get more of, right? And the thing that you tax, you get less of. And as they were giving people more money, in the thought that they were helping, they were actually hurting. And it actually created a subculture in the Black community where they were become dependent on the government. Matter of fact, we kind of, before we got on this, talked a little bit about Frederick Douglass versus Booker T. And Frederick Douglass was saying, when people were asking what should we do with the Black man, he told them, do nothing. Do nothing for the Black man.
Amen. So
leave him alone. You see him going to school, leave him alone. You see him going to work, leave him alone. Don't do anything, because you're doing his cause more harm than letting us just, do what our God-given talents we already have.
Yeah. So just so our viewers understand, Frederick Douglass was a free Black man during the Civil War and a leader afterwards. Booker T. Washington was also a Black man in post-Civil War America, was a great leader, founded Tuskegee Institute and other things like that. And you're saying that they were of the view, stop meddling, just give us our freedom and let us make our own way, and we're going to do just fine.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, I wanted to kind of touch on that whole theme for a second, Dr. Wallace, because you were telling me before the show that there was another Black leader that arose in the 19th century named W.E.B. Du Bois, right? And can you comment on who he was? What was his approach to the question of Black inequality after the Civil War?
Well, he was more a militant in his approach. He helped start the NAACP. They were looking for more government help, and eventually he became, I don't know at what point he became a communist, but he eventually joined the Communist Party. And so, as you know, communists want, government control. They want centralized control. And so while Booker T was talking about, putting your bucket down where you are, basically learning a new trade, there's an argument that Booker T created more millionaires than anybody back in his day, because he taught people vocations, right? He said, if you want to lift yourself up, you want to be able to take care of your family, learn a vocation. And if you can do these things well, everybody will come running to you regardless of their race, right? If you can make a cabinet, if you can do carpentry, you can do plumbing or whatever it is, and you do it well, people don't care what color you are. They want, matter of fact, most of the folks at the time were used to Black people doing a lot of the work, because if you had slaves, they were the ones who were doing all that stuff, shoeing your horses and all kinds of stuff. So he was like, hone that skill and you'll be able to, and everybody will want you, right? And at the same time, he gets criticized. They call him basically an Uncle Tom. But what they don't tell you is at the same time, he's still funneling money to those who were fighting for civil rights. It's not that they were against civil rights. Everybody wanted to get rid of Jim Crow, but legalized segregation. So there's a difference between legalized segregation and if you decide to self-segregate, the choice of I forget what the term is, choice of association. Being able to associate with whom you want to associate with. I don't think anybody has a problem with that. What we have a problem with is forced segregation and then forced integration. Nobody wants to be forced by the federal government to do anything, right? Except I guess you have to pay taxes. You can't get around that. But other than that, and I guess in time of war, you get conscripted, to join the Army or the Marines, or I did mention Army first. I was in the Army. So anyway, Anyway, so Du Bois was more leaning toward more federal government help. The government's got to do something. He was more in line with the what later became the civil rights movement. Um, uh,
The modern civil
idea
rights movement.
that we need to have the government do some stuff.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
So it's really confusing to folks, but I guess what I'm wanting to draw out is Booker T. Washington, George Washington Carver, these men were strong believers in Christ, and their writings are full of messages about, how Christ is their strength, they can do all things through him, how forgiveness is what we're commanded to do, and the whole grievance and anger thing is not a way forward. And yet today we hardly ever see that message. And your book is about how the black church traded biblical truth for political ideology. Do you feel like that's sort of the same battle along the same lines, and we're still dealing with that Christian approach versus a worldly approach today?
Absolutely. I think that the Christian approach is not looking necessarily for government. So the problem is that they've kind of made it not only identity politics about the amount of melanin in your skin, but it's also become we need the federal government to do these things for us. And my argument is no, we need God. We need to be looking, first of all, the church used to be the center of everything back in the day, and actually up until the 1930s. So the black vote starts to change. Democrats start making inroads into the black community in the 30s under FDR, and it continues to grow until you get to it continues to grow even now, but especially once the 60s hit and you've got the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, which actually were pushed through by Republicans, but that gets swept under the rug. And so yeah, there's a difference that's starting to be created where where even the church starts to move away from this whole Christian ethos, if you will, and move more toward we need more government assistance. We need the government to try and do these various things because we have folks out there saying that we're still not free. We're still, there's just this systemic racism is everywhere. That was BLM. They were talking about how you step outside, and these forces are out there against us. And I say that's a fabrication. It's not true. Systemic racism was killed with the Civil Rights Act. Once we got rid of Jim Crow, there was no longer any systemic racism that you can talk about. What is there out there that white people can do that black people can't? I mean, I don't see it. I see black people everywhere, the heads of businesses, the former presidents and vice presidents. And, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, the NBA is full of black people. So is football. Now it's kind of started to dwindle in baseball, but that has nothing to do with racism. That's about culture and about how many people the ability, that's a whole nother program, by the way. Let's have baseball.
Yeah, baseball. Let's talk.
Stop there.
Love baseball. Yeah, no, we could do another show on that one. But so Dr. Wallace, let me just ask you, if I may, a sort of personal and candid question. From your perspective, I think you just answered it to a degree, but what is it like being black in America today? Is it like, okay, no different than being white? Racism is pretty well behind us in terms of daily living. You might encounter it sometimes in certain individuals, or is it a daily struggle to find opportunity, to get ahead, to achieve your dreams? What do you think? Somewhere in between, or what would you say?
Well, so I generally start out with this. Look, racism is you're never going to legislate out racism, just like you can't legislate away adultery or any other sin. A lot of these sins are heart conditions, and I talk about it in my book because that's, we get to the parable of the sower. The condition of a person's heart determines how you hear, and how you hear determines how you grow. And so if a person's got all this stuff in their heart and is not willing to change, you can't really change that. So but we do a disservice to the community when we act as somehow there's this white supremacy out there that's somehow holding us back. And I especially, and this is the message to the church now. I can't speak to what's happening outside the church. Because for in the church to have some kind of idea that white supremacy is even stronger, and this is the implication. They may not come out and say it, but the implication is that white supremacy is so strong that it keeps you from fulfilling your God-given destiny. Really? Nobody can stop me from fulfilling my God-given destiny unless I allow them to. Sure, there's going to be some people that may not like me because I'm Black, but there's all kinds of reasons people may not like me. They may not like me because I'm 6 feet tall. They may not like me because I'm lighter and somebody else is darker. We have that within colorism within the Black community, dark skin versus light skin. We've got other reasons. I've got a PhD. There may be some people think, you think you're so smart because you got a PhD. No, I mean, the doors just were open to me. I wish I was 6'6" and could dunk like Michael Jordan, but that was I didn't get that. And nobody chooses the parents they have. No one chooses the color. Nobody chooses anything pretty much when you're born and where you're born.
Yeah.
And so some of it is just, some of it is God ordained. Some of it is because everybody goes through something. Nobody has this clear path that, everything is hunky dory all the time. And there's this clear path that you never have to struggle for anything. And sometimes people want to claim that somehow is because of the color of our skin. Well, there may be somebody somewhere, but if you're going to allow that to stop you, then you didn't have much of a persistent attitude or perseverance to be able to move forward. Because there's also a spiritual, as Christians, we also know there's a spiritual battle. So I try to get people to understand, stop looking at race and start looking at what's behind this. The enemy is trying to stop you. And so, especially if you have a God-given destiny and you understand that you've been called by God to preach the gospel in whatever situation you're in. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, I'm starting to preach now.
No, it's good stuff. Well, so here's another little bit of a sensitive question. But as I'm working in this field of government, politics, and culture, what I see among many Black Americans is that the race issue trumps most everything else. Even if it's just perceived, it trumps most everything else. Like, you remember Joe Biden said so infamously, "If you ain't Black, or if you don't vote for me, you ain't Black," right? I mean, what? Why is that? Because Republicans are against Blacks and racist, and Democrats are the only way to go. Because that's what they care. It's like, well, what about these other biblical imperatives like abortion, like sexual morality and family and transgenderism? What about free enterprise and communism? And what about these principles that are also critically important, but it's like those things don't even matter if race is involved. Am I being unkind, or is this how you see it as well?
Oh, definitely. And in fact, I address some of that in the book, that we've put our racial identity ahead of our Christian identity. And I call it out. In fact, if any group puts so let's deal with ethnicity, because there's only one race, the human race.
Amen.
So race is actually a construct. But if anybody puts their ethnicity ahead of their identity in Christ as a Christian, it's idolatry. And so that's why I call out the church, because we've made politics about racial identity or ethnic identity. It's not about how do we advance the kingdom of God. It's about how do we advance our people, because our people are constantly under assault. But it's a lie. See, they get away with this lie if you find any incident of racism somewhere or perceived racism, it's gemmed up, and it's like, oh, see, we got to do something about this because this is what's happening. And you're correct. Many in the Black church have put our racial identity ahead of everything else, which is why the Black church is able to join forces with other people they know don't share their biblical worldview.
Like Planned
because
Parenthood.
they share the same melanin in their skin, we got to stick together, or they're going to put us back in chains, as that same president once said.
Yeah.
They'll put us back in chains. And people don't know their history. It wasn't the Republican Party who put black people in chains. The Republican Party was one that was started to end slavery, not to continue slavery.
Yeah, and so the sometimes it's called the race card,
Yes.
But recently, Jasmine Crockett, Representative Crockett, she lost her primary a few days ago, and she blamed racism. Stacey Abrams, when she ran for Congress in Georgia, lost, and she blames racism. Now, it's not just race. Hillary Clinton loses presidency, and she blames misogyny or sexism. Is that kind of thing? I mean, I'm asking an obvious question, I think, here, but is that damaging? Is that harmful? Do we need to cut that stuff out and just, accept your loss? It's not racism. It's based on maybe your personality, maybe that you are a bomb thrower and a liar and incompetent, or, that I don't agree with your policies. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I think you're right. And the interesting thing about the Crockett race, though, is that it's from her own party then. Then her own party is racist, right?
Right.
Normally speaking, they only say that when they get beat by a Republican.
Yeah.
But now you've got to say it, within your own party, they decided to choose the white male.
Mm-hmm.
So why isn't it sexism there?
Yeah.
Why has it got to be racism? And I agree with you. Maybe it's just the way that you purport yourself when you're out there, dancing in the halls of Congress, and some of the, putting on a fake accent, to think that you can, that other black people would identify with you more. Unfortunately, or fortunately, now we've got a person who's a pretend Christian. Tyler, what's his name? Tallarico or something like that. If you've heard some of the stuff that he's talked about, man.
Yeah, he's not from our perspective, he's no better than Jasmine, but.
No, they're both terrible. They were both terrible. But to your point, they were using racism, the race card, playing that. And I think it's kind of lost. There's some people out there. So look at Donald Trump. It's like it doesn't affect him. You call him a racist, call him whatever. And it doesn't stick.
So I want to make sure that I give you an opportunity to educate our viewers. What is this whole thing called critical race theory? We keep hearing it CRT. And is that biblical?
No. And we don't have enough time to really go into any extent, but it's critical race theory is just repackaging, communist ideology. It's part of the cultural Marxism, where they figured out that they couldn't overthrow. I mean, in Russia, they were able to overthrow the government, but they can't do it. They realize they can't do that everywhere. And so they've got to take over the culture. And so they want socialism to take over the culture, because socialism is the march toward communism. Mm-hmm. And people want to act as, okay, democratic socialism. Well, it's all bad. It's all bad.
Yeah.
And one of the things they purport is that, to be white, that, born white means that you can't help but be racist, right? Whiteness becomes the unpardonable sin. And it's just not biblical. They act as though the society is bad, and we can fix the institutions, then we can have this march toward what is it? Paradise, nirvana, whatever you want to call it. And it's not true. That's not biblical. The Bible says we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and so we all need redemption. Critical race theory is totally antithetical to that, and Christians should have no part of that.
Amen. Well, let's go back to this idea of a grievance industry. Dr. Wallace, can you comment on what you mean by that? There are still people that are playing racism for their own, because it advances their own political power and financial gain. Can you unpack that for us a little bit?
Well, as I mentioned before, Booker T, it was happening in Booker T. Washington's time. It's happening now. It's never going to stop. So let me give you, for instance, so uh, uh, the grievance industry means we've always got a grievance. We've always got a complaint. So once you had the civil rights legislation, so you had the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, they get passed in help of Republicans. Then Dr. King goes on to, we need to do something economically. We need to give people a guaranteed income, right? And then it goes on to the next thing. We need this, we need that. There's never an end to it. So I tell people who argue for reparations, if you were to cave in and give reparations, it wouldn't be enough. So if you give $50,000 everyone, and a lot of folks would just misspend that, right? So if you don't know how to use money, if you give them money, it's always going to be misspent, and they won't have anything left. So, well, that wasn't enough for all the stuff that we really went through. There needs to be another payment, or there needs to be something else. So it never ends. It's this whole idea that you've got people on the hook. Another instance is the Southern Baptist Convention. They apologize for the stances they took during slavery, right? But people keep asking for more apologies. I mean, how many times does an organization have to apologize? I think it's only one time, right? But they continue to be asked, for an apology. So it's never over. They'll continue to move the goalpost, as you will. It'll never be over. So what people have to be able to understand is that this is a game plan. This is a part of the plan of socialism, to continue to cause division, to continue to challenge the status quo. And one of the things I forgot to mention earlier, when it comes to critical race theory and the racial grievance, they act as though, so they want to target the enemy as someone like you, who's white. Well, they call you cisgender, right?
Whatever
who's
that
white,
is.
cisgender, and you're a Christian. Actually, I keep trying to tell folks what they're actually going to want to fight is actually Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
They want to fight Christianity, and they act like it's the white man's religion. And I have to remind them, Christianity came out of the Middle East. Duh.
Yeah.
And you know where socialism comes from? Socialism comes out of Europe. Communism comes out of Europe.
Yeah.
So let's stop pretending as if we're switching one thing for another. It's not. The word of God comes out of the Middle East, yes. And it went into Africa before it got into the fullness of Europe. I mean, in Italy, obviously, Rome, but it also goes east, it goes south, it goes north. It goes all over the place where God spreads his word, and it has nothing to do with race.
Right.
It has to do with the human condition, and that Jesus died for all people, anybody who accepts his faith. But for communism to work, they have to crush the human spirit. They have to crush what is in human beings to be able to bring about their utopia. That's the word I was looking for before.
Yeah.
Their utopia.
So supposedly, but they never have, right? It never accomplishes. Well, let me try to squeeze in one more thing here. Thank you so much for that. And this is the whole idea of diversity. So we've been preached at now for 50 years, diversity, 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 and yet Dr. King said that his dream was of a day when a man wouldn't be judged by the color of his skin, but by the content of his character. And yet, under this diversity mantra, it seems like we're constantly being told we need to be looking at people's skin and having groups, and people are judged based on their group membership, not based on their individual status. So I'm wondering if you can comment on that. Is that whole diversity mantra the wrong direction?
Well, see, when I have conversations about this and other things, especially with people on the left, you have to ask for definitions, right?
Yes, sir.
Sometimes we talk about, diversity, equity, and inclusion. You have to understand what they mean by that, right?
Yep.
So they're not talking. So I don't have a problem with diversity I used to look at commercials and wonder where are the Black individuals in these commercials? If you're trying to reach, like, let's give you an example, like McDonald's or something, right? You should have representation of other people if you're trying to get them to buy your products, right? But that's just diversity in terms of somebody saying, well, I like your product. And there are other people who, I used to work for Sunday school material. This was Urban Ministries, which was predominantly Black. They were looking at Black churches. But I used to tell those who were predominantly white organizations that were putting out their material, look, just put some Black faces and some Hispanic faces in your stuff, because you're trying to reach everybody, are you not? But when it comes to diversity of thought, I'm not sure I want diversity. And they don't mean conservatives. What they're trying to do is make conservatives feel bad and be able to bring the LGBT community into your organization, right? To be able to bring somebody who doesn't believe in Jesus as Lord. Example right now, the Moody Bible Institute, they have a lawsuit against the Chicago public school system because they won't allow students from Moody to get involved in, they've got some kind of student teacher program that those who are in college can come in and somehow be a part of teaching in Chicago public schools. Well, they're resisting Moody Bible Institute because it's a Christian college and because they won't hire anybody who's not Christian.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
So they're not really interested in diversity and equity and inclusion. They want their point of view to be pushed down people's necks. And so there is a type of diversity that I think we could all agree with, right? If you could find some people, if you're trying to reach a certain demographic, you want to make sure that you've got some other people who represent that demographic, right? I mean, it only makes sense. But I'm not asking you to do so to change the criteria. You need to meet a certain academic criteria, or you need to believe a certain doctrine that you've got to sign. I mean, that's true for anybody who's got a religious organization. You want to know that they agree with your doctrine. And if you don't, regardless of what color you are, you're not going to be hired.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about regular diversity, in which we talk about, I don't have a problem with it. If we're talking about, no, we're only going to hire Black people now because Black people haven't been hired in a long time. No, we're looking for certain standards. And if you got people who are all on the same level, you may decide, you know what, we don't have enough women represented in our organization. We're going to pick a woman out of this group, or we may pick
Dr.
somebody
Wallace,
who's African.
I apologize for interrupting you. We've only got a minute left. How can people find your book?
Oh, well, they can find it on Amazon. They can find it on Barnes & Noble. They can find it on Google Books as a digital, and Apple.
Okay, and how do they find out more about your ministry?
freedomsjournalinstitute.org. That's freedom with an S. freedomsjournalinstitute.org. We're actually named after the first Black newspaper called Freedom's Journal.
Fantastic. Sir, thank you so much for coming on Truth and Liberty. It's been a fascinating conversation.
Hey, I enjoy it anytime.
All right. And folks, I wanted to remind you about our free product giveaway. It's called The Calling to Manhood, a book I wrote about how God has made us male and female and designed men for a unique function and calling. And we need to reaffirm that in the body of Christ today. Go to our website at truthandliberty.net and get your free copy today. Thanks so much.